Hello, everybody. We're about to get started, just a couple minutes. We're very excited for today's event and the wonderful poets we have here with us. Just going to wait a couple minutes for folks to come in, and then we'll get started right away. And we're working on some technical issues from James's side, hoping to get a video going soon, but in case we just hear his voice, maybe we can all jump in and have a sort of psychic fantasy about what the visual looks like and pay more attention to the words. And we got a heads up from Jehan that there's a storm in Beirut, and she was kind enough to work on a different angle to be able to beam in with us today. So hopefully that will also go well, but we'll be with you in just a couple moments. For people just joining us, we're just hanging on just a couple minutes, working in some time to the Zoominar for everything to to get to be what it needs to be. All right, folks are coming in now. Today, Luke is our tech person from London Learning. Thank you so much, Luke. And it's making me think we should maybe have a musical interlude into these events as people come make their way in. It looks like James is here. All right. While we get started, I'll just sort of organize us for today and get started. That'll give some folks time to come in and shift from whatever they were doing before into our event today, and we'll just get started. A shout out to my amazing and lovely students who I see in the audience. I can't see you, but I'm so glad you are here. We will get started. So أهلا وسهلا بالجميع وخصوصي في رفاقنا حول العالم. Hello, comrades and friends from all over the world. Again, a special thanks to my co-organizers, as always, Frank, who is on tech today, Susanna and Luke at the London Learning Cooperative. Make sure you check them out. We are Mental Health Workers Inquiry, and they have been so generous in letting us use their platform to hold these events over the last several, I think now it's been 5 months, so very appreciative. I'm your moderator for today. My name is Lara Sheehi, or Lara Sheehi. I'm a psychoanalytic anarchist clinician, and I'm coming to you from occupied Pamunkey land, which is now Williamsburg, Virginia, still belly of the colonial beast, but I don't think any of us can sort of work towards health when we disavow the realities of settler colonialism and whose land we're on. So I'm very appreciative of the land, the Pamunkey people whose land I live on. Just to sort of, I'm going to locate us today here. I'm going to go into a little bit of background information about the mental health workers inquiry, and then I have a very short introduction to what we're doing today, and then with no further ado, I'll open it up to our wonderful panelists today. Each of our phenomenal speakers today will present their powerful poetry and work. They'll share for a maximum of 15 minutes each with a little bit of wiggle room, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers from the audience. So please hold that in mind as you listen and receive their work affectively. If you have any questions for them about technique, about them personally, about their work, please feel free to put it in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And we will try to answer them live, all the questions. Also, a reminder to everybody that this is being recorded and you'll receive a recording. I saw that question pop up, so you will receive a recording since you signed up. So please feel free to take breaks as needed. We know the crush of Zoom world is hard and sometimes you need a break, so you will have time to come back to it. Also, the recording will be on YouTube to allow for closed captioning, so we want it to be accessible to everybody. Just a short word about the mental health workers inquiry. The inquiry is a project committed to 3 things, and it came together, Frank, Luke, Susanna, and myself. Firstly, we're about establishing a radically inclusive, internationalist, and avowedly anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist psychoanalytic practice in a way that problematizes national, racial, and class barriers among a multitude of things. Secondly, we're developing a mechanism that brings together member-led trade union organizing with private equity to transform adjacent clinical workspaces along similar lines. Thirdly, we're aiming to create theoretical and social space in which to discuss what we're doing, what other people are doing, and how our project relates to broader questions of mental health praxis, psychoanalytic theory and practice, revolution, and the political economy of healthcare. One of the ways we've been doing this is reaching across the globe, and particularly into the global south, to bring voices that otherwise are not as accessible to folks. And excitingly, we're also working on creating an actual clinical practice that the virtual world has opened up for us. Usually you need bricks and mortar, the virtual space opens up for us, but we're hoping to work towards that, and we will be announcing that very soon. Concretely, also, we're continuing to organize these monthly events. We've also started an online reading group. So those of you who are interested can sign up by DMing us here or on Twitter, and Luke can put our Twitter information here, and then also our email address. You'll be added to a WhatsApp group, which you can be a part of or not, but and you will be part of a reading group as well. So those are just housekeeping issues. Just a couple words on today. One of the things we've tried to do over the past several months is represent more accurately the range of spaces in which we hope folks will take up issues of mental health with a particular focus on psychoanalytic clinical work. More specifically for me, I'm interested in challenging the splits of clinic and politics, clinic and the social, and the clinic and cultural production, because they're just that, a split, right? One that shores up a very particular social and political order that renders certain spaces off limits through displacement, right? We displace and sort of put things off to the side, make them in the periphery, while normalizing and therefore entrenching specific codes of being, both professionally for clinicians, but also for the folks with whom we work as clinicians. Today is yet another example of us demanding that the system expand in ways that recenters what is important, that platforms what may have been sidelined or marginalized, or in other ways, some folks would say othered, into a sphere that insists on, here specifically, poetry and performance be seen as integral to resistance and really to psychic survival. it comes probably as no surprise that psychoanalytic practitioners may feel this way, despite Freud and North American psychoanalysis' obsession with science and quantifying our craft. And I say science in quotes because we know what science means and what it doesn't mean, in a particular, how it gets codified in particular ways, where indigenous modes of production or cultural modes of production and art becomes non-scientific, and science means a very specific thing that displaces the rest. We also know, more importantly, that our method works, but we know more importantly the space and texture and manualization that are shored up by Eurocentric ideas of precision fail to capture, for example, movement. What Feluke Taylor, last time she was with us, if you have not seen our recording from last time, it's fantastic, please do. But she was talking about movement and how that movement, and both psychically and literally, becomes life-affirming and sustaining. Because the way that I think about it is that it represents a psychic agility against the backdrop, particularly now, of fascism. I'm coming to you from the United States, which is well and alive. You can see that no matter who wins, we're up against a very steep battle against fascism, with the majority of the population being okay with having a fascist leader. With what's happening in the UK, of course, with Brexit already happened, but continuing the effects of that, settler colonial violence, both in what is now North America, but in Palestine, and elsewhere, carceral regimes, and we see how capitalism and incarceration comes together against abolition movements. And of course, on top of all of that, as if that weren't enough, we have a global pandemic. So I'm thinking of you all in the UK as you go into your second lockdown that has been miserably handled, of course, not surprisingly so, but as we also continue to see spikes across the board. So against that backdrop, these art forms, and particularly poetry as resistance, seems so important in terms of reifying, life-affirming ways of connecting to other parts of ourselves that are othered. What I'm hopeful of today is that we listen and receive with an eye on how poetry, especially, is a site of cultural and intellectual production in and of itself, in service of resistance and psychic healing, not only in relation to other modes of being. That is, it exists in and of itself, is not always in relationship to other things, but is a mode in and of itself. And in doing so, perhaps we can together practice how one resists the compulsion to split these sites, itself a fragmentation and dismemberment, as Nadira Kevorkian Shalhoub reminds us of, dismembering communal spaces, collective solidarity, and global connectedness. Without anything else, let me turn it over to our wonderful folks today. I'm so excited for you to hear their wonderful work, some of whom I know personally, others who I'm lucky enough to be introduced to today. And I will read the order and introduce them, and then I will spotlight them, and their work speaks for itself. So I will go silent. We'll start with James Goodwin, who unfortunately is not here in visual with us, but whose voice is nonetheless strong and present, and I'm thankful for that. Just a couple words about James. James Goodwin is a poet doing a PhD in English and Humanities at Birkbeck University of London, with a thesis on the Black philopoetics of Marinage, breath, sacrality, and emanation. His pamphlet, Aspects Caught in the Headspace We're In, Composition for Friends, is due with Face Press, and his book, Fleshed Out for All the Corners of the Slip, is forthcoming with the 87 Press. His poetry's appeared in Intercapillary Space, No Prizes, Paratext, Data Bleed, Berkeley Poetry Review, Poetry Whales, and the digital poetics platform, Hi. Take it away, James. Thank you so much.
Hi, good evening. I hope you all can hear me okay. I just wanted to quickly say a quick thank you to Lara, Sheehi, for a really kind and sweet invitation to read. Oh, the co-host has asked you to start your video.
Did it work? Okay.
No, I'm sorry. And also, yeah, just wanted to just mention how great and nice it is to read with my fellow panelists and readers. So I guess I will just read, I think I'll read 2 poems, and if there's enough time, I'll perhaps read another one. Excuse me. The first poem I'll read is called We Talk. I guess I don't really know how to preface it, apart from to say that I guess it's a poem about knowledge of escape, and the kind of internal, external contradictions that might bring up for sort of philosophical thinking about poetics, more specifically about writing. But yeah, it's called We Talk. Ethereal dreaming that we crossed short-circuiting all cadences of the heartbeat. No change to the words untimely bussing, that we hear us from all ends of the visceral clamour in single myriads, unseen from or regarded. We made realness forever return burst baseness of verse to link us outside the yard without lines for the emotions running on pull-up in the darkness, leading deep enough to get us lost in remaining in a long list of stairs. Whole arrays of sun carrying inside each celestial rhythm of the word's step, getting across personal back from earth in a movement without change, making us see change, all along remembering our share of coalescence. What are we to look at? And how saying it won't figure a line of flight, a jade of fluidity upon air we dress in. Glints of sunset, eyes touch waters humming mid-drift out of focus, rotates its pulsations, the planetary montage we feel out for. So much there, history just settled. Arc leveling suite of denuded sea greens into fuchsia pink F majors breaking live notes and looks away like surf. But evidence of things not seen as black, blue, vermilion. Deck of flesh over dusk in its already dawning. Dust kicked up dawning, also a witness of truth. Morbidity leaving heat glow or inclement lysis, with only tertiary gleams to signal dying woven into the impossible seen stirring each of our sophonophores. Diasporic at the same time seeing us in our lofty originary leave, roving where we are all the way to this thing dispersed. Round here we got our place in the sun, saying even then what happens to our straining to feel? Leaning bent without leaning in close to our eyes and see wind in between the oppressed in times gone. Mythos spurious around sameness of exhaustion. Homeless agitation appears, just wants to hallucinate eerie conjectures of decay, detritus, that we breathe from their dry fores and ashen finesse. We hosts of their memories' high water, mineral echoes of grief, can't help but fall in and out the dark wash together. Held up, jettison away from self-snaring, couldn't get away, whispering ultramarine. We speak in undulations, knowing full capture in escape. Used to meeting in each other's pockets when there's no more sacred in the small outside. No one else heard the system in the stoma. None listened in for love, but for apotheosis, rewrote the blank indeterminate main. Fleet of foot through stone, your marsh meadowwood, unlike Daystar, ritual, still life, the fuck the police. A black body is sacred everywhere, leaving no clues. Unlike Daystar, ritual, still life, the fuck the police. A dead black body is sacred everywhere, leaving no clues. Raised, interlacing a curious sleet in the iris under a deep rift. The second poem I want to read is called Side of the Imminent Vex, Prologue, which was published on the 87 Press's online digital poetics platform, The Hive. So thank you, Azad, for the chance to write and give this poem over to the home that is The Hive. Impatience in plain that we let the damned and wretched wave new circuitry. Think oxygenated epidermis, torn, wasted, driven on ends, siding with the imminent vex. Through trabecular songs approximating stuttered oceanics. Unremitting wakes, out from fleshing the contact of sound unmade, coming already met, finally conscripts around its involution of new phase transitions in the crypt. Might just feel like finding other ways to lurk without shops, opening shutters onto seasides we couldn't discern with our hands. A strip of air whips from essential to essential, right down to this essence of evasion so much that it takes us along a Delphic soma. With the same interminable sky, we love this something that we are at all, strict in daylighting cycles and collections, in never having been back from a failed miasma. The night holds philharmonics we forget, as long as there's also the promise of a sea without terminus, far out from the familial subsumations of an uncheckable key it lit until years later. The yard overflows an expanse of planetary mains, wherewithal the impressed bespeaking encountered wrestlers othering encounters. Feels like coruscating an accents we wear outside of ourselves for the life on track. Listen instead for the elated skip, boldened, elastic. To 7 blacks killed in a septet, and more caught slipping in and out sing, but here, we are the ones that need help living how to see our missions hum hell a lot colder and purely unrepeated. Our residues are anti-material, brush co-substantial, marauding a failed subjectivity, lest the dead and dying smoke a personal orbit they pretend to dip, outlast your tug set, overlay a more tabernacular beam, but still give for you and your friends iterant twilights. You're the black night, doused levity, fish of an indigo rasa, staring blank aboriginal saltback, still clapping the same broad sways of high windrush outside our lazen streets, for one of the people's cracked anathemic songs, saying, true say we run upon how we sounded lyric for lyric like you think, is that what you think? Stepping your way out of this poetry for what was left unsaid of your sense of touch, through feeling these sensations I can feel your tears in our gilded fabric like granular scansion stress audible to remission. As lies the sentimental house and harbour for the imminent vex, but must not, but nobody knows. crypt in resounding this or that metaphoric hylomorph, thrusting a black kid, spit and aerial pleonasm makes in us sit and shit an organizing principle we don't leave outside or inside our ruinous flooring, teeth and skin, lip, nail, eyelid, breath and phosphorus, more spit without making duppy, and instead, when I don't know you, but you must know who I am, syncopated plumes and shattered. In blockades, there's echo in compress. Corners on corners, lyric vex on long sequesters. Black eviscerating givenness taking us up in the clouds. Seeded liminal looks gave ancestors and fleshed. You can't see their reflections glare of sunlight rimmed. They are too alloyed and all day artfully black boreal. Black light visioning the same splitting of black action going to this place called nowhere fast, and it's got to work. Ereal, hard, flat, never says what, because they are there from ions and rhythms. Rhythms of work setting pace around the bits of anamorphological rhythms of work setting pace around the bits of grim shard ice. Shadows be barely viewed, crossing blocked off lays, cresting a pure state Lexus behind the curb, in ethereal offshot rules of threes unprotected, still built to task, yet nobody made us. Just roll back abiding, script a deadweight ride. Speak an aporectic crowd in a burst daydream on a realer rhododendron. Can't then CCTV a slice of black world sheet, the way we lay of the land under streetlight mystic arc. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. It's hard with the Zoom world where you don't hear people clapping, but if people are feeling what I'm feeling, I think you're getting roars of claps. Thank you so much. Let me introduce our next poet. Sarona Abuaker is a poet, artist, activist, and educational outreach worker exploring the interstices of visual cultures, Palestinian futurisms, and sorry, I just lost my way. Palestinian futurisms and queer phenomenologies. I always mess up with that one. Her essay on Palestinian visual culture and return will be published by Kohl, a journal for body and gender research, as part of their Queer Feminisms issue in December 2020. And let me tell you, I've had the honor of seeing this beforehand, and it's phenomenal. So please don't miss this or her incredible voice. Her poems have been published in Berfra and as part of the digital poetic series by the 87 Press. Her debut collection will be released by the 87 Press in 2021. You got the coup there, Azad, at 87 Press with all these fantastic people, and she is based in London. Take it away.
So thank you so much. First off to Lara and to the other amazing people that I'm reading alongside tonight. Really excited to be here. And yeah, so I'm going to be reading two poems. The first, it's still a draft. It's called Living at Work. And I started writing this because over the course of the pandemic and feeling my body kind of responding to lack of movement, and kind of working in such strict ways, I felt my body kind of stiffening and reading Grundis, kind of feeling my body actually cramping up. So this is, I guess, a response to that. A magnificence. Work until your neck breaks. To go home, turning on a green light, car runs red, neck breaks. Hands, cramp, shocking, curling inwards, scraping, palm, frozen. Just as books, sculptures, photographs are stolen and placed in the British Museum, relics held in memoriam for future sins committed under guises of globalization. Why not put our limbs on display? Future deteriorations. Do you feel it? Do you feel it when your spine curls, neck stiff, hanging from at the head? They don't need a gun to kill you. They just need capital. Do you see them? Do you see them? They grovel, they eat, they tear, flesh in mouth, machine in hand. A bird approaches me. I want to open my hand to feed it the breadcrumbs I have. My hand tries to crack open. Typing, clicking, scrolling, wrists curved up, fingers curved down. The keyboard takes on attachment. I hug it closely and kiss it goodnight. As free competition detaches me from the natural bonds, my hand cannot open for you. Its point of departure begins and ends at the keyboard. Natural touch, clawed hands cannot hold each other. They beat at the doors, at the walls, on the floors. Isolated limbs developed in the collective to become isolated. I cannot hold you, my love. My nervous system vibrates, compresses, tingles, aches, mechanical compressions, fixed compositions. The following objects are only able to be held in my grip. 1, a 2017 Asus laptop. 2, Samsung Galaxy 8 cellular device. 3, a Khalili hand-painted coffee mug. There are no natural harmonies between our bodies and capital. That's my first poem. The second one is called Slug Ops. This was published on the digital, as part of the digital poetic series by the 87 Press. So thank you for that. Deviant slime. I find myself. It's springtime again. Sun ra shines loudly. My first memory of being in the night. My cousin finishes pouring salt over a slug, sounding a ghost-like cream. A knock on the door. Soldiers. They smell the death of their comrade. Following the slime, wafting in to open cupboards and doors, they are looking for someone, trying to put the blame on me blazes through our eyes. The particularities of understanding a sluggish impact on an environment lies upon the fundamental unearthing of their paths, alleviating devastations. Life is created through systems, not an event. It ignites once it contacts air. It is strange but not unseen, typically surviving off of leaves, stems, and roots. After the slug seeped out, its contents consisted of Uzi. 2, 5 metal activation mechanisms, including safety pins and levers. Parentheses, skittering tear gas grenade. Once the salt draws the water out from the slug, it bursts into flames. Smoke-producing agents, garlic bulbs fill nostrils, glowing as it dies, melting illuminations. The slug is an incendiary munition. There are a multiplicity of methods which are recommended for ensuring slugs are not able to access your grounds. It is a spectrum of possible actions. The one chosen depends on a number of factors. Slugs are known to damage crops, seedlings, and new growth. The way to restore these known effects can be handled in gentle and simple manners, planting indigenous herbs and roots containing a scent they interpret as a pesticide. Parentheses, Majorana circria and Gudelia torfurti can attenuate a slug's desire, placing a copper tubing or shiny tape around the perimeter of your space can attenuate a slug's desire to approach. It is thought by scientists the metallic quality of these materials induces a shock to the slug's senses once it discovers the shape of itself. Whilst these recommendations historically and presently can be of assistance, It is incredibly important to note the distinctions in these various phenomena. The slugs were not always like this. It is noted that there was a dramatic shift starting in the late 1940s. Radical reconfigurations in the landscape reflect firstly in the ecosystems. The natural diet of the slug found within this region consisted of indigenous plants, herbs, and fruits, parentheses, Salvia fructosa, Rus, Cororia, and Cretonia silqua, end parentheses. After several extensive case studies, I am finding they've developed a taste for steel, metal, and white phosphorus. New reports from sectors 67 and 48 show there is 1 week in the year where aging slugs go to the perimeter near the Dead Sea to die and make way for the young, inducing such clusters of light. Their passings resembled the geography of India during Diwali. Harboring deep, thriving in thick sediments, white phosphorus burns alive, building itself as a fact, particle by particle, slugging it up to crunching, steely, waxy, mesticizing, the top meeting us halfway, brined in stubbornness. This soil poisons the earth, dirt decaying terra firma, sprout metallic trees, bullet-picking season lasts, from when the snake's head begins until this tail end slides into its mouth. The only way to ensure future growth is to break up the compacted soil layers, a deep ripping. This effectively loosens the hardened grounds, respecting the soil types and crop rotations indigenous to the space. A new birth requires immersive organic matter, allowing unconstrained access to uncontaminated water lying below. Exposing the steely slugs to healthy debris will ensure their environment supports a new trajectory. Without soil reconfigurations, their surroundings will not support any new potential. Without a change in relationalities, there is no shift. Slug ops specialize in the smuggling of hybridized gastropods in the central regional sectors. The gastropods originate from the group of Pulmonata, taxonomic name Sigmaritha, which are characterized by having paleo lungs rather than gills. The land-breathing gastropods, as all gastropods, produce slime consisting of water, mucus, and salts. The properties of this slime are elastic and great, serving multiple functions. Enveloping the slug, slime allows it to move, prevents the drying out of its exposed tissues, and can be rubbed on the human body to promote wound healing. Above all, slime is hygroscopic. Gastropods are able to absorb moisture from the air due to the protein structure of the slime, which creates sticky, moisture-capturing gels. Slug ops developed a hybridized gastropod by genetically modifying the slime's hygroscopic properties to extend to the trapping of steel, white phosphorus, and metal existing within the soil and water. Atmospheric totalitarianism, where steel cannot be separated from society, eating itself inside out. The aim of slug ops and Amelia integrations is to effectively detox the soil, the foundations upon which the society rests. The slime works to break down and siphon the toxic materials out of the soil through a filtration system. All gastropods can create an epiphragm, a temporary sealing structure made out of dried mucus. Slug ops extended this ability to create a filtration system trapping the toxic materials with the slime's amplified protein structures. The gastropods will strain steel, white phosphorus, and metal from the water and soil molecules through this hybridized sealing and create new, freshly clarified slime, which will return to the environment through a large gland located in the slug's mouth. Slug ops is pleased to report the non-hybridized gastropods living in the region seem averse to their hybridized counterparts at first introduction, based on previous experiments. However, after a few hours within the same airspace and newly clarified soil, the non-hybridized gastropods' colors are less gray and brighter, crawl with no twitchy demeanor, and no longer carry the scent of roasted garlic bulbs. Footnote: slugs create two kinds of noises, a rasping whilst eating and a whistling or whooshing when crawling fervently. Curiously, slugs residing within the sectors where drones proliferate in the skies have begun producing the same buzzing sound as the drone. This new effect was discovered by a farmer residing outside of these sectors, who reported the ground holding his olive trees began humming and vibrating slightly, only to pick up a slug from the ground to find it shaking and buzzing with the same tremor. Any levers, shells from weapons consumed by slugs, are broken down and suctioned out. The newly seved slime will heal whatever toxic material it touches thereafter that exists within the earth. The central regional sectors encompass a total of 6,020 kilometers or 2,320 square miles. Slug ops have smuggled a total of 6,000 hybridized gastropods into the sectors by forming meaningful understandings and relationships with local farmers, political prisoners, unions, sewing circles, and students. Each gastropod is allocated approximately 1 square mile, and the operation will last an estimated 750 days for the gastropods to completely sift through the molecules. Material signifiers alluding to the incurring success of the operation include newly sprouting vegetation and zones where local infrastructural support has been denied, water becoming fit for human use in areas where sewage systems have been destroyed by military assaults, and soil color returning from gray to light reddish brown in areas where military equipment was tested on the local populations. A deep ripping, a slimy return. I will report back, slug ops. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarona. Is it all right if I post that link to that from the 87 Press that you just read in the chat for folks to have? Okay, great. I'm gonna do that now for everybody. All right. Next up is Azad. Azad Ashim Sharma is the director of the 87 Press. As you see, we have a lot of his talent here with us today. I met Azad last December, and it's been a wonderful friendship since then. He's also the author of Against the Frame, Barque Press, that was out in 2017. His second poetry collection, which I have just gotten the chance to dive into and is wonderful, entitled Boiled Owls, is forthcoming. His poems have also been published recently by Stand Magazine, the Asian American Writers Workshop, and Gutter Magazine. Take it away, Azad.
Hi, it's real pleasure and privilege to be here. There's a lot of participants, which is really great. This might be a landmark for that, for kind of vanguard British poetry. At least it feels that way for me. And to read with Kohl and James is kind of a first for some of us who've been writing here for a while now. And then to have Jehan and Sarona also here is real great. It's a great lineup. I'm quite in the daze with it all, really. But I thought I should write something new. I've just finished my master's, so I haven't really had time to work on new poetry. So this was a great opportunity to do that. So this is a long poem called Alone in the Face of Our Time, after Vladimir Mayakovsky. 1. The lines from all 5 fingers of my 5th hand strike the 5th of November. We're going back to that great scandal to give Guy de Fawkes the intel, the memo, the fist to punch the face of public taste, the suicide vest to give him the quick exit from being framed, so that the law, the setup, the greater scandal can be enforced without reason and with real feeling. Fuck the law. I try and break it at every opportunity I can. I don't want to think about justice in an unjust world. Give me the world where justice is the given. In solitude, we found the revolution. Clinging to the reddened, fractured leaf. In fragments, we found completion, the matchstick and the candelabra. We were nothing but points on a graph. Our deaths reduced to statistics, the primary violence of numeracy, the map and its geometry, the reduction, the abstraction. What are these proper nouns and their plastic cutout significations? Surely we are nothing here, if not alone in the face of our times. I waited for you in that still, soft, sleepy ride at the back of a Prius, or was it an Insight? I screamed silently in the heavy air, nauseous, obeying the rules they gave us but disregard when it comes to their own. I wanted to be one of them, one of the good ones, in that pulp, the palpable difference between us and them, the ruled and the ruler, etchings of reflected ripples in the pond in Brockwell Park, the nonchalance of the ducks, the way the tree rose from the water, angled and indifferent. And yes, all of that looked like a poussin, but all we could do was describe and set the scene. The lovers gather in the People's Republic of South London, for that is what the South Circular will be, forever and still more in the time. They gather and kiss through the masks, murmuring about life and the constant battle with the voice in your head, that internal policeman who tells you that you are worth less than worthless. Kill the cop in your head. Follow the line of tablets all the way to the pharmaceutical company, dulling your brain with fizzy good. Kill them as well. In death, there will be completion, at least a beginning. Make your way to the Poussin painting. Refuse the stillness of life. By the ripple, by the root of the tree in the pond. Whatever you do, avoid the supermarket and buy from a local grocer. At least the person at the till will not offer to save you money, i.e. to help you not spend more than you need to. A sale is the best time to realize your value. You are what you spend. Your life is a series of spending, a spree of transactions. But what will you do with this value? How will you turn this value into weapons? How do we blow through our own value with the horn of time? The blaring of an indestructible body politic, of the body as a body, which is a body, for blaring indestructible, alone in our times, all that is left is hatred and rage. To try and be happy is itself a huge ethical failure, an ethico-affective failure, which forced us to the ballot with two worse than worse options. Two white men, or a white man and his colonized Indian stooge, who plays the accountant or the executioner on the Jacobean stage. Or am I breaking up here?
No.
No? Am I good? Okay, sorry. Let me just go back to the beginning of that. To try and be happy is itself a huge ethical failure, an ethico-affective failure, which forced us to the ballot with two worse than worse choices, two white men, a white man and his colonized Indian stooge who plays the accountant or the executioner on the Jacobean stage. Like Hieronymo, we had to get mad again, consumed by the madness and rage. Get your fucking gilets, get your fucking ballys on. This is the Spanish tragedy for the 21st century. In the year of our Queen, 2010 plus 10, we will tell them all to fuck off if they try and ask us to do anything. Yes, we are anti-work, anti-tax, anti-future as the continuation of the divided present, anti the twice crowded past, anti-everything, but we want everything. Vogliamo tutto, but we don't need it. Them and their world and their rules. We are the fragrance of the coming east wind, the flagrance of the hand of poetry, the real poetry, not the one that looks for gold in a wok full of crispy egg noodles, with vegetable oil spluttering like piss against the southwesterly in a corner of an English field, not the poetry that loves the liberal race doctors who account for every genetic marker in your prescribed ethnic identity, which their doublespeak renders cultureless, meaningless, vacuous. None of that. Less of that instant rendang ramen poetry, less of that bourgeois collective masturbatory poetry, the cacophony of inconsequential political signifiers which calculate rhythm on a spreadsheet, that curdles the tongue which was once a scalpel. This is the poetry for the neighborhood kids, those who torch the construction site. Like, how the fuck are they even contemplating building offices in the middle of Brixton at a time like this? But we are alone in those blueprints against time, the rub and flow of it. Because to be fugitive in this moment is something you only realize after the moment is done with you. We are poets, and the Scots life chose us. Scots is you need to watch this film called The Hunt for the Wilder People. to get the in-joke. I'm sorry to be exclusive, but it's like gang life. This poem is called Poetry as Militant Care. If I have time at the end, I'll read the preceding poem, which explains why militant care might be important for poetry, but this is the answer to that question. Poetry as militant care. This poem will be described by the lackeys, the ideologically neutral, the ignorant liberal invertebrates, those fascists at the BBC, as a terror attack that razed Heron Tower. The Daily Mail will call this poem Mahomet's guillotine, which beheaded their angel of death, Priti Patel. The Guardian will say of this poem that its thumbs are bloodied with the remains of Dominic Cummings' eye sockets. Dear reader, to them I'll say, this poem is a poem, just a poem, words on the page, sound from a throat. But reader, my dear friend, we know their hypocrisy. We know this poem is a strally, is a strap, is a gun blast from Lennox. This poem is a song for freedom, and it's for the Utes and the Utes and their friends and friends of their friends, forged by striking miners on the impact between the rock and the job and the hard place, the stone from May 68 that hit the meat wagon, La Via Chilena, the loathing of what life has become in 2020, where sites of learning are turned into prisons. This poem is solidarity with the children of workers, the students in Kabul, against the death cult of politics, its tightening financial neck brace. And it's true, as a poem, it is true that we are workers. Poets are workers, laborers who create the new rhythm of life, the metric vocality of fugitive vexation. And with this anonymous collective breath taken in sharp at the edges, sharper at the center still, immer noch, the poem knows what it means to see in high definition, what it means to work 0 hours at the mercy of administrative overloads, to make for making's sake, to want to burn down the city of London and throw their private police in jail. This poem is the call, and you, dear reader, you are the answer. Struggling for shelter in the bleak midwinter, this poem struggles against the bourgeois magazines and the taste of their idiot editors who accuse it of telling but not showing, being utopian but not pragmatic, who put Larkin's sanctions on our entangled structures. Yes, this poem has a gun and a plan, and it aims at the person over your shoulder who eavesdrops on the conversations in your head whilst you read the content and decide on what to do with it. Against that piddlesome infamer, we will pull him out, root and stem, and it won't survive beyond you, this call, and the answer you give it. The question really is how to keep the call alive, how the blood from the death of poets foretold will varnish the ground of the future and not litter the pavement by the retraining camp. Then silence, in that slow, deep time. Let poetry water the orchard and watch the sun come through the periphery, because the reckoning and age of anxiety are both already here. And we don't have time to fuck around, my friend, dallying about, reasoning with fascists and liberals. Listen to the following very carefully. Every day that they keep Philip Larkin on the syllabus is violent. The real culture war is between those who have spines and are ready to do something about these idiotic realities, and those who lost their spines crawling before the master. Do I have maybe time for one more? Yeah? Okay, cool. This is from the same sequence. It's just coming in at the end. Wait, am I going to read? Yeah, no, this is a good one. Okay. Let's call it the epilogue. I retreat to Laconia and learn about actions and interventions. The prospect of discourse is increasingly all too much when there is more reason in the faucet. The clear autumn sky was once more embellished, stolid, a descant over Kronos and his peripatetic on-scene, the moment. In the end, I am grateful for poets and the space we held for each other to be each other's luminaries. When the cars were stalled on the driveways and one found more compassion in a cigarette than in the British state's response to the pandemic. But was it a Ruthenian breeze over the Schönbrunn yellow sun that turned autumn into winter's soubrette? What made the season changing so perfidious, like a campanile watching over the tremors of uncertain lands? We gathered in the pied-à-terre and on the balcony in the tenement block, looking at the hill over the dog-hard city in a state of lament. With demands as clear as carrots, the stooges have taken over, those delinquents and their vice-chancellors, servants of civility and scaffolders of the new normal. An inky rag is the same as the brutalist Rose, the journalist, and his never-ending scroll. Do you want to feel alone in this fucking stupid period in world history? What kind of world has become where the fascist looks more Michelin star than a horse meat lasagna? And in the underpass between two quarantines, he stops you in his Burton suit, clutching his broadsheet with Candy Crush loading on his phone, and he has the audacity to ask you if you know of any white nationalist reggae. Why does the law expect reason in such an encounter with sheer indigenized whiteness, wanting of imagination? The time for politesse and treading the eggshells is over. We ought to rid the world of these entitled, confident, neurotypical people. Start with the Tories and their electorate. The grass will thank you later. And that's it. That's all I've got to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We're cooking with gas. I mean, this just one after another, and I'm so appreciative. Let's turn to the next person. I got you guys. It's Kohl. And I just want to say before I read Kohl's bio that I want all of our bios to be like this, especially in conferences. So Kohl Denyer is an artist and writer based in the gut of class treachery and watching over his shoulder for every budding cop. Over to you, Kohl.
Thanks so much. Thanks for introducing me. Thanks for hosting the reading, Lara and Sarona, Azad, everybody, James. I'm going to read something that I put together. I'm going to actually time myself because I feel like that's essential. So I'll kind of split between something that I wrote on Tuesday in work. I'm currently a key worker at SOAS Post Room, obviously, alongside the cleaners and porters, doing our imperial service. Right, yeah. This is called I Look Up at My Death Ball. It's great. Look, singing, dancing, hand gestures jutting out of corners. It's mine, it's my death ball. Minted at home, hastened, bathrobe managerial exhibitionist on a bacchanal fuddle. Look me in the eye, penal disorder. Look me in the Ouroboros, hoax the lunar house, binge again to a bladdered heart, weltered, stoic, watching with vampiric comfort, the regal, undying cloisters filled. Shut away and sing to yourself, hurt the tensor, lived out a joyless marriage for an international baccalaureate, didn't graduate, so eating my fruit with no backup, this adrenal hard drive boils under me, a thickener to start. Blood billionaires in a geatric paradise get hidden in chamomile lawns and cowslip illuminate the epistle flax, irises having your everlasting sweet peas and horse meat dinners. I detest for a keepy a halo of enemy speech, ousting misty hearts, ease and violet playboys. The empire vanishes like Lutyens' dog ears. No hope for sustainable leakage reduction analysis. They creep inside your single glaze, lock you in, you have to pay premium rate. So humans make their own history. Look, please fund this car park now for non-legacies of financial big flash. In the upscaling pan, every carbuncle, every council balding bestie scalding the child entrepreneurial style slasher. Southwark Council is a tango with private equity firms. Bararangaroo under a stone, rip-off dragnet, cash flows, cowabunga. My temples ringing with reduced global headcount like fox hunting the skies, it's legal. Like tenement shift dwelling deeper inside my line manager's mangled heart will likely vanish, and I'll stayed on in Greece boiling frontline, outmarking your colleague enemies, London drained of all human life. Isn't it fucking marvelous? Now we can really get back to this real post-life rebuild. And my asthma, the atmosphere, foot-jobbed rural retreats are in splinter form. Round up all the peasants, crush dust, vanguard logicians forming an aleatory map of a city. It's winter, you forgot a wailing offshoot, a shrinking gut reboot. It's a gig and go homeless, tough seal. From the sinkhole, forgotten people thriving in the undercrofts, or pelted windows, lassoing 4 decades of grouting. Now that's history. To the outer dark, a foal in my head is unchecked scullery. The pewter scrubs away any civic unrest. Always did. We know from Reconstruction, and you didn't listen. Now I have to set fire to this mountain of crated plastic bottles the size of a short terraced house covered in shrink wrap, stacked on wooden pallets, burning all day and all night. The plant wall buckled from the heat inside a rotary of 3 night shift types, spontaneously relieved of their duties, whilst the incendiary potential kept going, and everything is take out this smiling lawn of dead mutton asleep. Your town got dug up by a quantum chartered surveyor, beelined a subterranean self-care unit, a foal in my own or unseen wing ambit, flattened me out, run me over, this past national, germinate, unmade on cushioned levee, every single soul sought doing privation, overcome a bed throw, this rotten rented sink in dynamism of a dog leash blew over. Again, clipping has been turned off. The kiss of death on truncheons is a reliable ticket receipt made quieter to the seal of life, thicket and spree. Step on the frog and make it crazy again. And then this one is called To the Huts. Nerve presets next to my accomplished alarm, locking day and night out, livid in celluloid, its orbital home, moving, stupid, liquid, forever. In the curing of sleep, you cannot decline that feelings excite big zeros as crown paint camps in a baked sky. Diagnosis, the fracas is illustrated, trauma made the bloodline moot the vein in circulation, as our ears are now in excellent condition, as the sound is almost always awful, clocking the hum, scaves about the streets with the throat struck in blood, burst padlocks. That is proof enough it never counts feral under the baton rounded to cost pride into a large bolus, its texture marble, the larynx, taking a charge of lifetime disposals. What is one chokes the sky and crosses it through. We have the caster there, now singing out, clear the keys, uptake the floating scale, matured time, kick the lock free, the voice sealed, in the ring outcry. No one wants to see the ballistic gelatine record, since it has decreed the air already, mixed with bone dominion, where no job marches run amok over the proud varicose, fat on sun loungers. Watch the juvenile lash out. Now watch the choppy sink in Saturnalia, in Badlands. So eat the chicken wings, gilded in a better hour. And this is an ode to a pyromaniac from Durham. Ode to Minnie. Slivering on a heat belt made of ambrosia is the chief whip, a chubby-fingered naughty. In a truce, don't call a basket or other receptacles below. No, the large crowd predicted, as usual, that there would be no significant rival claimants, all being, all saying, and sharing none of its DNA in the first place. so make off-white wickerwork like Beauty in Victoriana pop, and it toured globally for many years. Huzzah! Staged as mimes of English history in perjury, in fields the brass wrought to the cub, hymning back to an impossible sweat gland to lay a scent and pick up to lay one more persistent, is death of clique leaders on the A149 in Sandringham. What are you going to do? Are you going to fine him? Are you going to put him in prison? It's ridiculous. The outcome is satisfactory, and his car runs on a crisp white wine. That is satisfactory. That is satisfactory, and it smells delicious through the hills. I saw 14-year-olds carry out hideous acts of courage with cracked heads and things like that, yelled at stones and trees, more broken heads in the morning then. They yelled at stones and I called God and the military, and both came on the dot. Now what the fuck are you going to do? I've got God and the military on call whenever the fuck I want. The outcome is inevitable. This is your dirt grave. I said it was out of the ordinary, standing there, but oh, the glow stick vigil garden is beauty without measure, and it all started to compost. All for a seatbelt probe, 11 teddy bears walked out in sobbing protest. The plants, still in vigil glow, followed them one by one all the way round Europe, and back my love for you, the police, and a number withering in Althorpe. You and what fucking army, Johnny Oddball, Pyro Queen, nothing to stand on or face the full force of law. Your life, this dough ball fondling, legs just gave way to a new style share platter. Out the ordinary, woke up in a bath of shit mud, whose coming of silver shining through. That's just the way I am, the way I was bred. I'll probably read like one or two more. I've sort of dissembled my my pages, so I've created pure chaos for myself. This is called Tesco Value. For workable anatomy, new decimal impressed on the condition of intense, purified awareness of the young and the state of their coherence is to make distinct concentratedly, despite throbbing uncertainty of being just right relief to the social kernel of abolition. Patter the balance. Looks like austerity produced this urban stampede, and the unkillable infants with no name or place stiffen in the air preserve this basmati as a living, thriving literalness, taking in a 360-degree revolution of a world and says, I'm not a piece of shit, I'm a piece of society. Will never be exhausted by feeble sketches or piloted extinctions in tinctures with lease go down our debt is mind dependent, and a negativity so negative you say a tungsten ring is forever, but the basmati is still a living, thriving literalness. I'll read one more. Is that okay? Private detectives, geneticists, and etched out Muzet in scale-free networks, 1,000 petty grievances. Change that and fix dynamics in human contracts, make them break with our ethos, make them disappear in old moons. The baby traffic from elite homes where history shows rancor in a heirloom, to gaze on a genome from Bernard Castle, silvery white herald moths, all fall in a pile of outgroups, remaining get root, brained, fix-fucked, to brand diviners, reject piddle rushers, coop on your phlegm, customarily out-puffed, ardent, cup-bearing liegemen, swine of lapsed English intelligence. Jack in the office, burrow deep in cheap, frozen yogurt. Ask yourself, to be or to do? Peel back skin, look demented, feed out of maniac milk. Gene tree, cometh sprightly, Robert Healeen, at the gates of Somalis. Crashing out, a stammer bags the rational fraction. To fragile refinement, look pisshead, it's global warfare. Look up the fuckers. Race to the top by lonely song, geared and warm in bluebell light, ameliorate the grim cycle. fMRI scans of people playing financial crisis. bathe his money, keep fire breaks, prediction, impossible. Unhinging my rubber hand to joy of macro scale, tightly coupled at the safety gates. Remember rain in Leeds on your closing lids. A stony wind, now tire thick love, hemmed at law, and a people mantis. Wait in malediction. I'm sat on colluding loam, steely misery, every line reversed and bent of care. Look at naked floorboards and wondered, trying half remembering to do the knuckle down or besmirch pride as punishment of quality. In heat ringed out, a harness of mine and my own, a clearer sheet of morning loot over ordinary sun, and be not with this nerve gaggle, peaking on nights in wet tremens, or as if this won't wait for me, a hurried bangle of jute and ulcers clawed up. Of course it will wait, its willing neck, as it pangs, gladly prig my ear, my national, germinate, in representing no people. Oh, ere the mess crossbred before we set sail on stewed grass so green, the sad equals do not calibrate. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Kohl. I really appreciate it. And we have one more person, but just as a reminder to everybody, if you have any questions, just put that in the Q&A and go ahead, and we will answer that later. The next person is incredibly near and dear to my heart, and has been for almost 20 years now. Jehan and I were undergrads together at the American University of Beirut, and it's been delightful to see that our lives continue to overlap in these meaningful ways. Jehan Bseiso is a Palestinian poet, researcher, and aid worker. Her poetry has been published in several online and offline platforms. Her co-authored book, I Remember My Name, is the Palestine Book Awards winner in the creative category, and that was in 2016. She's the co-editor of Making Mirrors, Writing by and for Refugees, which came out in 2019, both of which are phenomenal. Please check them out. And Jehan has been working with Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, since 2008, and is currently the executive director of MSF Lebanon. Take it away, Jehan. You're muted.
Okay.
There you go.
Do you hear me? Yes? Okay. So thank you so much, Lara. It's been really good to be here and to hear everybody. I'm really happy to be here. And I think that what this panel presents and the intersection of politics, poetry, and mental health is a very, very interesting triangle to keep thinking about. So I will share 4 poems. I normally write short poetry and I really don't do much preface, except I will say that the first one I'm going to read is, I'll read 2 poems focused mostly on Syria. So between 2012 and 2017, I interviewed around 70 Syrian doctors working in really difficult conditions. And a lot of the ways that I've been able to process the information that I received is mostly through poetry. And this is a poem called Requiem for Raqqa. 4th of July fireworks descend hot as acid. Call it chemical, not white phosphorus. Call it mistake, not massacre. A doctor in East Ghouta tells me one grave holds his entire family. You left me. A pharmacist sends me a voice note saying there's no more insulin. You left me. A politician in the US doesn't know what Aleppo is. How could you leave me? In occupied Jerusalem, a young man says Syria is the Nakba of our generation. You broke my heart. Hide in a cafe in Marseille, order Turkish coffee with lots of sugar, go to the library in Alexandria, order lots of books about politics, then stop reading. Don't watch Al Jazeera, don't listen to the BBC, make up your own mind, says Beirut graffiti, but you left me, you really, really left me. It's been 6 years since I slept, Syria. That's one. The second poem I'm going to read is actually one of the first ones I wrote on Syria, and it's called After Aleppo. I'm just try to find this, sorry. Or I don't find it. No, I find it. Okay. Or I don't find it. I'm so sorry. It's actually a little bit late and I'm already sleepy, which is a shame because it's only 10 p.m. It's only 10 p.m., so I'm really ashamed. After Aleppo, I learned to read early. But the truth is, sometimes I wish the letters remained funny drawings for longer, before the uninvited tyranny of words and before other tongues found home in my big mouth. I don't mean it literally. One day, we will go back to Aleppo, you said. You don't mean it literally. Habibi, 4 years ago, we shouted for change, and now we're citizens of border towns. We go from Turkey to Lebanon to Egypt, but we don't find Aleppo. We have food vouchers and assistance criteria and intermittent empathy. I don't write any more poetry. The boat is sinking, literally, but I don't want to leave this room. It smells like jasmine, and you taste like freedom. I think I'll read a couple of more. As you see, my poems are quite short. This one is called Family is the First Wound, and it's still in draft. Part 1. My mother is teaching me to make broth. You can use it for everything. A cold, heartbreak, a headache. We are in Amman, 165 kilometers from Gaza by car at Google Maps. But the screen glares. Can't find a way there, try again. At the sink, I am 5, I am 15, I am 35. I hear myself saying, Mama, Mama, look at me. I'm asking you a question. I'm talking to you. Please look at me. Can't find a way there, try again. Her eyes remember me, remind me that the kitchen is always where the murder takes place. 2. Jiddu taught Mama how to swim, but not how to run. Built a house for her in the middle of a fire, stood at the edge of our cardboard countries and said, live with it. This is where you're from. 3. The country you live in is burning again. My grandmother sometimes forgets the word Lebanon, but she remembers giving an armed young man a bottle of water at the checkpoint in 1982. Were you scared? No, because after I gave him the water, he prayed for me. Diaspora is such bad weather. Last one. How we live. Everything everywhere is burning, and yet beautiful things continue to happen. You are in love at last. Your friend is pregnant again after a loss, and Teta leaves her wheelchair to take a few steps on the grass. No matter how global the fight is, my world is only good small. Coffee and nectarines, mezcal at sunset, red lipstick on my teeth in the middle of a story, and your breath on my neck. And yet, an arms depot explodes, taking away half of the city. A refugee camp burns, and a man is shot dead in front of his mother at a checkpoint in Jerusalem. Another police officer in the wild white West acts with impunity. Za'atar is more than thyme, a piece of bread dipped in olive oil, and then my mother is more than home. That's it. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm happy to read these. Many of them, it's the first time I read them, so thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to spotlight everybody so that we can have a conversation. So slowly, I will bring you all back in. Hold up. I think it's only letting me do 3 at a time. Oh, I think this is why. Here we go. James, I've just asked you to start the video so it allows me to spotlight you.
Sure, no worries.
There we go. Here we go. Add spotlight. Okay, so here we all are. Again, just so moving. I mean, I took notes of just like words that stuck to me, right? And imagery, and grief cuts across it, right? And I don't know if that's just like where I'm living in grief, or where so many of us are, but that's what I'm feeling the most. But I have a question for you all, and then maybe we can open it up to the audience. So please feel free to put your Q&A in there for our panelists. So my question is, we were getting ready for today, of course, I again, about the split of the clinic and cultural spaces of production, poetry, which is one of them, and looking at the craft of therapy as a site of production as well, of knowledge production, right, as poetry. So I found myself wondering, how does poetry, or your craft particularly, but your poetry, how do you understand it as a mode of resistance, right? But the mode of resistance that I was thinking about is a vehicle that wards off psychic annihilation, right? Because I'm just thinking about, and these themes cut across everybody's work in different ways, in really moving, powerful ways. But, you know, imagery of empire, the drudge of capitalism, class warfare, war and empire that's called conflict, but is actually empire, sort of expanding settler colonialism. How do you think about your poetry and your craft in and of itself as a vehicle resisting against the psychic annihilation that might come if we let the weight of all of that in? And I'll just open it up to you all.
Azad here. I'm thinking poetry and resistance to psychic annihilation. I mean, the first thing to say is that I think there is, and I'm bearing in mind that I can't speak for all traditions of poetry, but I can speak, not with authority, but with a degree of kind of decade of knowledge and practice on the British kind of left-wing vanguard scene, and all the sort of educational apparatus that surrounds that. So, previously left-leaning universities, I say previously because they're all kind of right-wing now. Basically, if you were to look to the States, you have poets like John Wieners, who is a great example of a psychiatric patient and a poet, kind of the original sort of like drug-addled schizophrenic poet is John Wieners, and who wrote some of the most tender poetry and also some of the funniest, actually, I think. And in the UK, we've got several poets who were like that, and who had an intense relationship with I'd say their own psyche, their own mental health. One person is a comrade of all of ours, and who recently passed away, and I'd briefly like to acknowledge him. That's Sean Bonney. Sean Bonney was responsible for getting all of the poets of kind of his generation to reread Amiri Baraka, who is still not taught on our syllabuses, but we still get the fascist that was Ezra Pound, who was also another kind of psychiatric patient too, right? The thing is that poetry, when it's done in a particular way in the UK, has always been linked with the politically progressive. Even if you go as far back as William Blake, if you look at Rimbaud, I should say, in France, writing poetry and letters in the middle of the Paris Commune. This is us trying to use poetry as a tool or a device to share amongst ourselves in a kind of coterie audience, a coterie that often gets mislabeled as elitist or closed. What we have to understand about that is that the reason we keep things small and in small groups is because that is just unfortunately the natural formation of human beings. I mean, why should we not have a small group when we're living in these behemoth cities where everybody's meant to know everybody? I mean, it's completely unrealistic expectation on craft and on creative arts. To resist through language we have to think that the words that we choose today, the linguistic parameters of discourse are not, we do not get to choose them. For instance, one of the things that I'm quite passionate against, the psychic annihilation for a person of color in the UK, as far as I'm concerned, is complicity with diversity and representation narratives. These are neoliberal safety stops and safe gaps, safe words, for them to prevent their annihilation. So you get people like Rishi Sunak or Priti Patel or that, what's that, the Tory candidate from London Met, this Sean Bailey. You get examples of these people who are so out of touch with the communities they are quote unquote meant to represent. But here we are still having the kind of churning of that discourse of representation and diversity. Poetry can resist that. But the thing is that we need to have a community that is close knitted, where we can all speak like we are tonight, have these kind of panels. But you know, poetry has long been really resistant to psychic annihilation. I think that's one of its impetuses, and we're just carrying that on. You know, that's all we are. I'm passing it on to whoever else. You know, we're really just vessels. So it's quite, the individual is quite insignificant in my opinion. Yeah, that's me.
Thank you. Yeah, you reminded me of Jehan's words, my world is only good small. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't displace the global struggle, right? That it's always a tension between the two. How about others? Their thoughts? Jehan, yeah.
So I just want to put it out there that I think that the first thing that poetry should resist is kind of itself, in a sense of there's this idea that it's in some traditions removed or apart from the context and from the issues. And I think the first thing that we should resist is that the idea that poetry is a thing apart. And for me, I think of it as a crossroads and as a tool to process, but also disrupt whatever is going on. But there is this kind of, and I know we were at the university where we went with Lara, at the American University of Beirut. We were very much, it was very much very centralized white canon approach, and their poetry was definitely always a thing apart and trapped in itself. And for me, poetry makes sense when it gets out of those places where it's supposed to be preserved and, you know, gets its hands dirty.
But you know, you taught me about that, because I'm going to disclose a little bit, but not too much. We would be in the green space, like sitting together right before class, and I'd ask Jehan if she'd done the reading. She's like, no, I stayed up all night writing poetry, right? So it's like, it's seamless in that, despite the crush of what already was neoliberal, right? This sort of etching of a particular type of person. It's not lost on me that it was in the heart of Beirut, creating students and people who could take in a Western canon that was entirely divorced of our own being, right? That we didn't see ourselves reflected in, and not in a diversification way, but in literally a displacing of oneself. And here was Jehan, who constantly found her way back to it through poetry. So that's definitely been with me the whole time. Sarona, did you want to say something?
So yeah, everything everyone has said has been really brilliant. I think poetry is a form of resistance. It makes me reflect on kind of the, around the time I started writing Slug Ops, actually, which was back in June. And it makes me think of, I started writing it actually when I was watching Nisha Ramaya, who's a poet based here in London, talk about night and deviance in night. And I was thinking, I was like, when's the first time, like, what's my first memory of night? And it was actually in Palestine, in Betunia, where my aunt used to live. And when I was 6 years old with my mother, and that my first memory of Palestine and of the night is when Israeli soldiers barged into my uncle's house and started looking for people or things. And kind of, I never really kind of looked at that as an incredibly kind of, as an example of, you know, so many things of settler colonialism, of occupation, of trauma, of A, B, and C. It was of the night for me. And kind of writing from that place, I think, of, you know, children, which my cousins and I were actually doing horrendously, like pouring salt over a slug. And then kind of seeing that place of then me kind of trying to speak to the soldiers and saying just absolutely, you know, trying to speak to them in Hebrew. I don't know Hebrew. So I was just making noises and they're just staring at me. And it's just interesting because you realize in that moment, so many things were occurring. And it's only, and you said this word that kind of really stuck with me, which is reflections. It's reflecting and then producing reflections. And I think that's where I find myself in writing, in writing poetry. Is it's almost like a compulsion. And I guess the kinds of things that it affords is like Jehan said, it's a form of processing, and it's a form of, I think, listening to the ghosts clanging in your ribs. I think that's what it feels like. And it's like, until you write that poem down, they're just there and they're like, yalla, like uktubi, like write, because it's like, what else are you going to do at the end of the day? Like, you know, Audre Lorde wrote in one of her books that writing is one of the most accessible forms of creating art, because you need, I mean, obviously you have to have the assumption that the person can read and write as a departure point, but you also need, in terms of materiality, it's a pen and a paper. And I think that's also something that kind of really sticks with me. It's the form of writing in of itself is quite laborious, but in a very, very kind of hurt, like painful, because sometimes your wrists hurt, but then also very like satisfying way. And I think as resistance, you kind of, it's that moment of choosing to write, and you know, even choice in that can be disputed. But I think as well, it's producing a narrative of oneself, or of oneself in their space. And yeah, so I think that's kind of my immediate thoughts regarding that. But I do think it's often too as well, I think, just briefly, I think looking around as a Palestinian in diaspora, and I loved that line that you had, Jehan, about diaspora is something is bad weather or something like that. I'm sorry if I completely messed it up, but Ziddy and I were saying, we're like, that's one of the best lines we've heard about diaspora in a poem.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's so right, which is you long to see something that reflects you, and I think it's constantly looking around and going, I'm not seeing myself. I'm not seeing myself. And then it's saying, well, then what do you do? And so, yeah, I'd like to leave it there for other people to talk.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I sort of was associating, and across the board, I was taking notes, and you're talking about a sort of reclaiming of space that was foreclosed, right? And if I'm thinking about psychic resistance against annihilation, it's a claim to a space that's always trying to be shut down or shrunken or displaced in many ways, which of course we can sort of extrapolate to literal people, and whether it's people of color or working class folks in the UK or in London, or Palestinian, or Syrians, or the Lebanese in your poem, or Black bodies, James, in yours, right? So there's an idea of reclaiming space, but I also had written down seizing power, right? Like things are stolen from us, but it's our time now to like seize them back and not wait for the permission to take that. Holding space, this is one thing that Azad, you had said, to hold the space for each other, but much in the same way that we might be doing right now, but in each other's work. And then the sacred space, which is, I think James said that several times, and just sort of thinking how all of that comes together. Just wanting to see if James or Kohl, if you wanted to add anything before we open it up to questions from the audience.
Do you want to go, Kohl?
Yeah. I mean, Azad earlier said something really grand, which is kind of and it's specifically larking. You know, like not that there are figures, there are people that there are enemies within, as Thatcher said, right? And so like larking, it's kind of looms over the British Isles like a Brexit poet. And he like quintessentially refines the meagerness of England, and it's a kind of like imperial decline. It's sophilistic anti-intellectualism, you know, and that's something to be attacked, or like in the bio, to be aware of. The cop in your head is, and the kind of burgeoning authoritarianism that comes with it, and those are those are kind of like proximal conditions, whether it's the kind of brewing or sedated class hatred. I mean, we have a classicist, if you will, as the PM, completely kind of like remitting this cronyism, and you know, you have these kind of incredible social injustices. I'm living in an Aylesbury estate, which is slowly being destroyed. It's what was one of the largest housing estates in the UK, likely to be replaced by private homes. So these are kind of continuous resistances and reclaims of space or of time. I think, yeah.
Thank you. James?
Well, I guess I echo everybody else's remarks. I was also just thinking about how rich and polyvalent the very formulation of the question is. I feel like there are references to that kind of question as a precept in a lot of literature from Black radical traditions and Black writers of, for example, the early modern period. I'm thinking of Aimé Césaire, the Martinican poet and politician, and the very interesting and infinite ways he I guess tried to, like, I don't know, humanize suffering in a really interesting way, but in the sense to, you know, to see suffering as contingent and congenial upon a really basic metaphysical sort of humanism, and I guess, you know, rather than sort of, you know, reconstruing or reconceptualizing suffering, you know, in the abstract, the abstract non-essential death of Black people, which is very, you know, which is foundational for, you know, a kind of like Western humanism, for example. But I guess I was thinking specifically about, so I guess right now I'm really interested in the idea of lysis. I mentioned it in my first poem, Lysis, and also Lies in the second poem. And I was thinking about that specifically in relation to Frantz Fanon, where he talks in where he sort of mentions in the introduction to his book Black Skin, White Masks, about conducting what he calls a lysis of this morbid universe. But I mean, that's in one translation. Another translation is a complete lysis of this morbid body. But so there's an interesting relationship between the body and the universe, which is really interesting to explore. But for me, I was just thinking about it in terms of poetics or philopoetics, you know, as a kind of alternative to both critique and analysis. Something that Azad said really was really interesting. I guess with lysis is interesting because it's a technical term in biochemistry, which defines the sort of breakdown of cell walls and cell membranes. But it also but in the same movement, it defines the abatement of disease symptoms. So it's both a cure. So it's both a kind of cure or remedy and a kind of poison in some interesting way. A pharmacon in one sort of in one certain discourse. But writing and poetry are kind of like that. So the conception of resistance or resistance paired or sort of seen through poetry is interesting, because I think even poetry strains against languages of resistance. I think poetry is just a strain against language, and I think that sort of yields an alternative way to sort of see resistance not so much in opposition or in relation, but resistance as you know, as something to occupy, to sort of enter into, to reconceive, but also in that reconception in that very sort of reconception to sort of leave it behind in the very name of resistance itself. So I guess it's a kind of resistance that is not sort of like, that isn't the sort of like annihilation of the psychic, but a kind of releasing of the psychic from the entrapments of subjectivity or subjective, or a kind of subjective individuated position or claim on the world, but to kind of enter in as the world. Or so I mean, right. I was thinking about that because Jehan mentioned referenced the smell of jasmine in a poem, and I was just thinking about what it would be like to be jasmine.
Mm-hmm. I think it feels like you're also talking about therapy, right? Where it can emerge as a site of both problem and cure, especially if it's a recapitulation of individualistic process that's disconnected from these larger structures or material realities. That's what I kept thinking about. And that's, of course, what Fanon was reminding us of, was that, like, you can theorize all you want, but there's material realities and that violence also brings front row and center. And so what is our space within that clinically? And what we're trying to do with these spaces is think through these larger questions, right? So how do we think about poetry as an intervention, as a sort of side angle around these issues, but as Jehan also said, as a thing in and of itself, right? Not always in relationship to everything else, but as something to take up as in its own right. Azad, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak back to a few things that were raised by Jehan, who said poetry must resist itself, which just really stood out to me. What Kohl was talking about with Larking, and especially what Sarona said about reflections and kind of being in diaspora. Like, obviously, I'm technically a member of diaspora, and wanting to see yourself reflected. And kind of James brought in this idea of, well, what James showed is that there is something very unique, and I think it is worth stating this for members who may not be have like a kind of traditional literature education, but it may be worth saying that there is a difference in a type of poetry written in the 21st century that bears a strong relationship to the material conditions of the world and what the world is going through, whether that, what are called current events, these kind of things, the news, that kind of shit. And a poetry that is also very interested in philosophy, in theory, and in context, right? So, for instance, you yourself and Jehan spoke about, having this canonical education, right? I also had quite a canonical education, but I veered away from it because I was given the opportunity to study more contemporary writing. And I think there is something about this, that the way in which we are teaching poetry is wrong at the moment. The way poetry is being taught from reading history forwards is wrong. We should actually probably go backwards in poetry, because we develop a much more refined appreciation of what happened in the past. And this goes for everybody, right? Because if you look at someone like Ben Lerner, who wrote 3 collections of poetry, white American poet, they were all quite bad. And then he wrote an essay called The Hatred of Poetry, where he basically latches onto Whitman's transcendentalist, like an American transcendentalism. Right? Anybody who knows anything about that period in time knows that what Whitman took philosophically was actually from German translations of Sufi poets like Rumi. So what we're actually talking about there is cross-cultural exchange. And then you're thinking about, this kind of era, especially in America, where we're talking since 9/11 of the clash of cultures. Well, listen, hang on a minute. But if Whitman, your great American democratic bard, was influenced by a Muslim living in Roman Anatolia, like, come on, like, we need to have these conversations where we broaden up the canon and we talk really contextually about what was actually going on materially in those periods. Wordsworth was not just a boring white old man who walked around the hills. This is a guy who believed in the tenets of the French Revolution in a time where in Britain you get killed for believing in such a thing. These are politics. That's the failure of poetry education at the moment. And I think that if we were to broaden that out, we would get this idea that poetry has always resisted something. It's always, whether it's language, at the crux of it is language, as James said, but there's always something contextually going on there that even the most old and boring poet might come to life off the page. So, yeah.
That's going to have to rely on white supremacy not to be dishonest, though, about relationality and history.
Yeah.
Exactly. Let me turn to a question from the audience, and I know that you all are not clinicians, but but all of you, even from your work, might deal with matters of the mind, the heart, the psyche. So just your thought process on this. Ben asks us, the psychiatric survivor movement has its roots in those who were incarcerated in madhouses and asylums. The long-term hospitalization of those with actual or perceived mental disorders, the human rights abuses they suffer, and their early and horrific deaths are a growing, not declining phenomena. However, those languishing in psychiatric institutions are increasingly marginalized within the politics of mental health. Why do you all think this is? And I will open it up to you to offer your thoughts on some of this. And it's in the Q&A function if you all want to read it too. Anyone have immediate thoughts? Jehan, you're muted.
I just wanted to say that I know, needless to say, we're not clinicians, but I just find it a very, very interesting and complex and layered question, and I would like to know more about the topic. So I don't have an answer, but it really made me think. So thank you to the person who asked it. I wonder if anybody else, including you, Lara, has some thoughts.
Does anybody else? I mean, for me, as folks sort of think through a little bit more, as a clinician who works against a certain type of, let's say, order, a social order that psychiatry and medical psychiatry and psychology work toward, it's no surprise to me that these folks are increasingly marginalized. I think in the context of the United States, and I've said this before, and Fanon reminded us of this as well, is that with the ways in which we are complicit with the state, we act as state agents. And if we're not consistently looking at our roles and the ways in which we actually are extensions of the carceral state, whether it's our impingement on families and sort of family unification and sort of thinking critically about the ways we're talking about people entering systems that are fundamentally failing them, and we're built to do so. These systems that we have were not built to rehabilitate anybody in any way. If they are to rehabilitate people, it's in a way that is in sort of complicit with maybe an idealized version of what health is, and we all know who gets marginalized with that idea and that politics of health, the politics of wellness. Remind me of Azad's sort of line about like that. I think you said something about to try and be happy is itself a huge ethical failure, right? And I think that that's really important because there's an industry of happiness, there's an industry of health, there's an industry of wellness in our field that oftentimes does not align with alignment in how people might see their own alignment, in how their cultural practices or indigeneity shows up as cultural wellness. And we have to be critical about the ways in which our field historically and in a contemporary sense has always been lock and step with the carceral state, with capitalism, with the violence done and particularly in the context of the United States, against Black folks, continued against the LGBTQ community, against indigenous folks, none of which has been acknowledged. I mean, all of our theories are built on this history that is incredibly violent in and of itself, right? A eugenics history that has just been sort of revised and updated as though if you fix the statistics, it fixes the history. If you fix representation and who our sample size is, that somehow that's going to take away the structural embeddedness of white supremacy and of ableism and all the violence that is wrought in the name of that. And so it's not a surprise to me that even as we try to include, these sort of ideas of inclusiveness, yes, they expand, but they do so without actually addressing the systemic failures that were built in on purpose to the system. So folks can sort of come to this and say, yes, I want to be a helper, but if you're not looking at the project of disorder, right, as being inbuilt into our process, and that we need folks to continue to be disordered in continuous array of disorder to fuel the machine and to grease the wheels, then it's no surprise that we continue to marginalize these folks and see them as pathological, or see them as truly not having any hope of change, just an assimilation into a neoliberal regime that actually looks at their symptoms as being pathological when it might be a normative response. I mean, of course, Deleuze and Guattari goes far back, saying, wait a second, this is actually the madness is not madness, it's actually a healthy response to a fundamentally fucked up system. But that's just sort of me thinking out loud. But the others have thoughts. I mean, Jehan, in response to that, if you had some time to think, or others. Azad, I know you have thoughts about this.
Sorry, I get wary of blabbering on too much, and I don't want to take up space that I shouldn't be taking up. But I mean, my brother's severely autistic, and I'm one of his carers. I'm a welfare deputy by British law for him. So I have some frontline experience of seeing the state of decline of the British welfare state. Oh, Jesus, fireworks. Sorry, yeah, got distracted. I myself am a recovering drug addict, and so I qualify as well as neurodiverse. In some circles of psychiatry, they say that, you know, addiction is a learning disability, yada, yada, yada. So personally, I've read a lot about neurodiversity, and I think it's a really credible social movement that's been going on for an incredibly long time. And, you know, if people are interested in that, Steven Silberman's book, Neurotribes, is the landmark document of that history. As far as psychiatric institutions go, I mean, you know, I can think of several things. The first thing is that we do not actually have a proper system of care. If the British state of welfare is a state, what we have allowed actually, even in New Labour times, those halcyon days before the Iraq War when everything was supposedly amazing in this country, no, they weren't. All of our taxes, this is what Kerry Ann Mendoza's book, Austerity, shows us, is that our tax has actually gone for the creation and maintenance of private contracts to privatize the NHS. This has been going on as a war of attrition for a long, long time. Psychiatric institutions, which are incredibly privatized in this country and have their own sort of private carer forces and all this stuff, they organize themselves like almost like private psychiatric militias. And the way that they carry on with the over-medication of patients, and also just the non-availability of some like groundbreaking treatments such as stem cells, that's happening. This is all part of the problem, in my opinion. The thing is that we lock people away because we are afraid of difference. We still haven't learned from Derrida. We haven't learned about différance anymore. No one's really talking about that either, because apparently, according to certain Marxist circles, Derrida is just a sort of problem of circulation or something else in capitalism. But Joshua Clover wrote that article, you can go figure. I don't believe in any of that theory value crisis stuff. I think there's still stuff to be learned about difference, that we haven't really talked about hybridity enough in diaspora, but diaspora also includes this problem of how psychiatry happens on the ground. Mm-hmm. We do not have a credible anti-psychiatry movement. That's the problem at the moment. If we were to read people like Thomas Saz or Peter Sedgwick and go back into the psychopolitics of it all, we would realize that essentially when Deleuze and Guattari, as you rightfully said, are talking about this, a healthy response. What is a healthy response to where we are now? Anxiety, depression, addiction. My problem was I had all three. So I was very fucked and I needed a solution. Thank God sobriety found me. But, you know, I still suffer from clinical anxiety and depression. You can probably tell that from my mannerisms, at least the anxiety part. But the fact of the matter is that these are our responses. These are natural responses, but they are giving us stuff to literally inhibit our brain's response without questioning the material social conditions that have given us these conditions in the first place. And that same goes for all of our institutions. What health should be public. We should make this very clear. If you want us to work for a fucking living, to make capital, excuse my swearing, but if you want us to work for capital, you have a duty to maintain the health of a worker in all forms of health, mental health included. I mean, the fact is that we're very behind on these, on having these open discussions. Everybody, you know, loves the influencer who's very kind of open about their mental health. But to what end are we open enough about our mental health? What are the material conditions that are going to change so that we can get our medication on time, so that we can get therapy perhaps for free, perhaps not for an extortionate amount, so that everybody who needs it can get it at the point of access? These are not utopian demands. These are the demands that are necessary in the 21st century, in my opinion.
They're a bare minimum. Right?
Yeah.
A bare minimum. Kohl, did you have your hand up, did I see? Or am I making that up? Did you want to say something?
No, I mean, I just wanted to corroborate with what Azad said. I think Azad just hit the nail on the head, absolutely. And I don't, yeah, I mean, the appalling state of the mental health sector in the UK is an actual disaster. And it's kind of sickening. But yeah, I mean, I can't articulate more than what Azad has already disclosed.
I appreciate it. Jehan. Can't hear you, Jehan.
I just wanted to reflect a little bit, or to shine the light on communities that even do not have the language that Azad has to articulate the dissatisfaction that they have. And so when I think of mental health care in an NGO context, which is something that I know well, and I'm working with within the humanitarian sector for now 12 years, there is a real lack of analysis of context elements that lead to mental health issues. And I find this incredibly problematic. There's a Palestinian psychologist or psychiatrist that I keep quoting who said in an article, what is sick, the patient or the context, you know? Because specifically when supposed mental health professionals, you know, helicopter into a setting that they know nothing about, and then they start to diagnose people as depressed or sad, or just the whole catalog, without putting mental health in context. I find it incredibly dangerous. So it's not just like good quality care or bad quality care, or good quality psychiatric care or bad quality psychiatric care. The question asks about marginalization, and I find this, like what I'm trying to describe, as a really dangerous form of marginalization. And most of the people that are affected by this don't even have the language to express it, because there's also a privilege and a power relation.
Yeah, and I know you and I have talked about that quite some bit, and it's interesting because I feel like even when people do have the language, it's not the language that people want to hear, because people are creating perfect victims or perfect patients that they end up wanting to see, and so they don't hear the something that needs responding to in a very specific way. We have one more question, and it's from the love of my life, so of course I'm going to read it. It's from Stephen Sheehi. It said, thanks folks for your great work. I personally find all of your work as an inspiration for me. You talk all about how poetry connects and navigates presence and past, ancestors and us today. Can you maybe also say how your poetry might help produce futures? How it opens for all of us places to go, places where we collectively meet to create new communities, as well as solidify the ones we have. And then he apologizes for the long question. But maybe we can start with James, because I feel like that's part of what your work is about, or what the questions that you have, and then open it up to the rest.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot to say. And I don't really know where to start. It's a nice question, actually. But I think it took me in a different, it puts me in a different kind of position. That is, I'm interested. I'm generally interested about how futures are produced. I'm interested in how something that, like the future, you know, as a kind of, you know, as a kind of way of sort of framing time can, you know, I'm just interested in how time can be produced. It just makes me think, what kind of thing or whatever, you know, what kind of thing or process is the future if it can be produced by, you know, by some means that we have, in the means here being poetry. So I guess I think about all of those relations. It takes me away from maybe it takes me away from the actual question. But I guess I wasn't thinking about future so much. I was thinking about this old obsolete word called futurition, which defines the state of being about to exist. So it's not. So it's not production or future, but it's something akin to a kind of experiment. And I'm thinking of experiment in relation to the last question, about psychiatric institutions and their marginalization of communities. I was thinking about about something the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said about how Black life in the New World is essentially an evil experiment, and it relates again to Fanon. I think specifically when he talks about the zone of non-being, but it's an experimental zone. I actually have the quote here from that section. He says, "There is a zone of non-being, an extraordinarily sterile and arid region, an incline stripped bare of every essential from which a genuine new departure can emerge. In most cases, the Black man cannot take advantage of this descent into a veritable hell." So the descent into hell is part of the experiment, which is to say, like, we live in the fucking experiment. So it's not that I don't think about the future. It's just that I don't think about the structure. I don't think about the structure of time as linear. I don't think about linear time. I think poetry, like, I think poetry sort of like thought about differently or studied differently, can invoke other kind of other kinds of recesses, so recesses where, like, the ancestors, the elements, material, aren't just there, are just along the axis of time, but are but maybe there are ways poetry can invoke how we can become infused or animated by them, but animated to such a deep degree that it takes us away from being observers of the passage of time, being observers of takes us away from being observers of decay and birth or creation. So I guess I'm having all these wild conjectures. I'm thinking of somebody else. Just to throw it in, I'm thinking about the old philosopher and mystic, French philosopher and mystic called Simone Weil, and she has this interesting idea called decreation, which is a kind of philosophical rumination on an old idea from Plato. But it's interesting philosophically because it's a kind of idea which strikes at a moment at which we could have veered away from the sort of modernist trajectory of the trajectory of deconstruction, which kind of like can be iterated all the way back from Heidegger in his ontological metaphysics. But her idea of decreation is making something created pass into the uncreated, into the sort of eternal matter, the primal matter, prima materia, rather than, it's different from saying making something created pass into nothingness, which is destruction, or nothingness. So the idea of decreation from the created to the uncreated is like it does the thing. It's like it's a resistance without annihilation. So it's a way of producing a mode of existence without without rejecting past, future desires or wills. The creation is a kind of abatement to the kind of to this idea of creation as an act of will. But it's I guess it's something more like animated and divine, and I think I think poetry should like be more like that. I don't know.
Others have thoughts or responses either to James or to the question?
Thank you for that, James.
Mm-hmm.
Every time you talk, I'm just like, okay, I don't know what to say. I think definitely this, I think this idea of the future being ahead, like you mentioned, this idea of being linear, the future, conceiving of it as being linear, and then of production, I think are things that really kind of motivate my work. I think because there's almost like a scratching of some sort that comes out of production. It's like clawing for something more. And with producing, when I think of futures, I think of, like you said, James, these things that are yet uncreated. But then what happens with creation? It has to come the idea, and if the idea is constituted as to be unimaginable, then what happens when it's imagined? And I think that's where like a lot of queer phenomenology kind of comes into this, where I think it can really help us think about, what do we do when we think of our work as something that kind of reframes or reorients where we're going. And I think, so when thinking about slug ops, like the thing that kind of captured me was this idea of, what do you do when the place that you come from is literally rotting from the inside out? What do you do when it seems like the very soil that you walk on can no longer support the kind of life that you're fighting to live for? And I was like, and I randomly started looking at slugs online and how to get rid of slugs. Like there's this idea of like looking at ground and in soil, and how do you take back what has been stolen, what continues to be stolen. And funnily enough, the according to Google, which, all trusted being knowing thing, the way it described kind of like how you can secure your grounds, kind of resembled to me like this idea of like decolonization. It was like, this idea of, well, what do you do with the very thing that you can no longer seem to kind of there's no reform. You have to rip it from the inside out, because it will still be rotten upon which you walk on, because it was never meant for you. And so I wrote slug ops, and I was like, haha, this is funny. Like, it's an idea that captured me, and I went with it. And now it's, it's not explicitly about, I don't say Palestine, but it is about Palestine. And I think as well, it gives you that space of I think there's that futurity, which is there, but then it's like, what happens when it's no longer, the future can be present. And I think that's what a lot of these works show, especially that were present tonight, which is bringing what seems to be, needs to be kind of ahead, actually here. And I think, Stephen, your question, how it opens for all of us places to go. I think that this is what cultural production allows us to do. It opens, and there's the space, and we must meet it, and from there we can work. And I think, I think especially this thing about resistance and mental health and these conditions. Some people who are very close to me were, very heavily involved in the first Intifada growing up, from the ages of 10 and onwards. And, they were fighting quite in a very material, physical way for a better world, for a world where they could live and, you know, not have soldiers trying to arrest them at like 4 a.m. consistently. And to know that they're, you know, they're in their 50s now, and to know that even at the sound of a car banging, they have panic attacks, because even in those spaces of fighting for a better world, in those collectives, the idea of the mind and of the social conditions were not necessarily juxtaposed or brought together. So you can still fight for a better world, yet what about your mind? What about your body and your mind and those things that are not separate, I would say. Not that I'm educated in psychiatric things, but you know, it's those things stay with you. So I think it's as well as like when I ask them, I'm like, well, you know, you were going through all of this. Were there spaces that were opened up for you to maybe look at not only the physical impacts, but those of the mental on you? And they were like, no. And I was like, maybe we can do better then. Maybe we can actually honor you by doing better in those spaces then. So I think, yeah, that's my rant for tonight. Thank you for listening.
It's an important one. So I have my eye on the time, and unfortunately we're coming down to that hour. I just wanted to say thank you so much to all of you for bringing yourselves, for bringing your work, your you know, your word, and I so appreciate the collective space that we were able to build and to share with others as well. Just a reminder, this video will be available, and hopefully this is first of many iterations of continuing this conversation and asking the question of poetry and how it shows up in our spaces, and not split off from questions of, like you said, Jehan, mental health, politics, and resistance. Thank you, everybody. We will be ending the webinar now, and then if the speakers want to hang around just to say a quick hello, that would be great. Thank you so much for joining us.